Chapter 7: The Jeffersonian Era. The Rise of Cultural Nationalism. The idea was to have a nationwide public school system for males, but what happened was there were private schools for those who could pay. But Republican mothers needed to educate their children to be enlightened, so they should be educated, but only to be good wives and mothers. As far as Indians are concerned, Jefferson had the idea that they were noble savages, that they could be uplifted with white education. And African Americans, slavery. African Americans should not be educated, or else they'll get ideas of rebellion. As far as higher education, like colleges, there were tuition fees and limited curriculum, which did not go to plan like they wanted it to. Medicine. Benjamin Rush had the idea that, okay, bleeding and purging, that's the idea. It will work. However, it does not work. So yeah. No. So midwifery is in decline. Instead, physicians are taking over their jobs. And then back to education a little bit. People should be educated as patriotic Americans. So instead of keeping the English form of English, we Americanize our English, especially with Noah Webster's Americanized English Dictionary, which changes words from like O-U-R to simply O-R and such as that. Along with that, there was a creation of a strong native literature, because up till now we've been reading like English from England literature, and we wanted to have our own. Some examples of those include Washington Irving, Mercy Otis Warren, and Mason Weems. Religion, weakening of traditional religions because of increased reasoning. So one of the ideas was deism, was that God created the world, but then he left the human race to fend for itself, essentially. Americans continue to hold strong religious beliefs despite the increase in rationalism. There is the Second Great Awakening, which fights the spread of the rationalism. At Cane Ridge, there was the first camp meeting revival, where people gathered together and preachers or priests, I'm not sure what they're called, but talk and try to gain new members. And there was more active piety and belief in God as an active force, plus grace and faith attained through good works. More women were involved in the religious revivals because of the movement of industrial work outside the home, so more women seek religion. Revivalism stirred African Americans like Gabriel Prosser to plan to rebel, but that didn't go as planned because the whites stopped it before it could even happen. Indians, there was a revival of traditional Indian ways and separation from aspects of white society. However, there were some Christian missionaries within some tribes. A dominant religious characteristic of the new nation is fervent evangelicalism. Stirrings of industrialism. The first modern factory in America was Samuel Slater's spinning mill. American inventors. Now this is important. Eli Whitney's cotton gin. It separates seeds from the cotton much faster. Like slavery was on the decline, but when the cotton gin was invented, slavery went up again. And there was the development of a textile industry in the North. Along with the industry, there was a standardized production of guns with interchangeable parts, and this not only just guns, other products as well. There's an expansion of foreign trade. Internal trade, the transportation of goods within America was helped a lot through the steamboat, which was perfected by Robert Fulton. This is called the Turnpike Era, which is new toll roads to make a profit. America is still largely agrarian. Only 3% live in urban areas, but there are still large, complex cities in America, such as Philadelphia, New York, Baltimore, Boston, and Charleston. Jefferson, the president. So right now, Washington, D.C. is not much more than a provincial village. Nothing like today. And this was perfect for Jefferson because he wanted to demonstrate the frontier life character as president. Like a normal citizen, you know. He wanted to eliminate the aura of majesty as well as exert influence in his party. He wanted to undo everything that the Federalists had done. Like, he cut taxes and he downsized the army. And this is a isolated incident, really, but the U.S. had been paying tribute to African barbarous states to give them protection. But Jefferson ended the paying of tribute to them. Then there was a court case called Marbury versus Madison. So, James Madison refuses to give Marbury his commission to be a judge because, previously, I believe it was Adams, did his midnight appointments so he could get all his Federalist buddies in their judge positions, but Jefferson didn't want that, Jefferson and his cabinet, which was Madison, refused to give him his commission, so he couldn't be a judge. So this case leads to judicial review, which allows the Supreme Court to decide whether or not laws are constitutional. Within the Supreme Court, there's John Marshall, who is the Chief Justice. He establishes the judicial branch as equal to the executive and legislative, whereas before it had not been as equal in power. So, he attempted to impeach obstructive Federalist judges such as Samuel Chase. However, impeachment was thereafter only to be used in rare circumstances and not routinely. So, as far as the other countries in the world, so we're talking about France. France regained the Louisiana territory back from Spain. Napoleon, leader of the French, seeks to restore French power in the New World. But the Spanish, who are still in New Orleans, haven't moved out yet. So they forbade American transfer of cargo in that port. But that was a problem because our ships needed to stop there to transfer their cargo. So Robert Livingston, an American, arranged the American purchase of the Louisiana Territory. Napoleon agrees to this because he didn't have enough resources to control that area. However, the question was, is this constitutional? That's what Jefferson was worried about. Do I have the constitutional authority to purchase this land? So he used the treaty-making power of the Constitution to justify buying that land. So he sent an expedition to explore that new land and go to the Pacific Ocean. And that was Lewis and Clark, which many of you know. They learned information about geography, natural resources, and Indians in those areas that they had just recently purchased. There was also the Zebulon Pike expedition into the upper Mississippi Valley. Most Americans approve of this new territorial expansion, but some Federalists rage against it. In fact, so much so that there was Essex Junto, or Junto, however you pronounce it, was an extreme Federalist who proposed New England states seceding from the Union. They needed New York and New Jersey to support them, but Hamilton and New York refused to support it. So the Federalist Aaron Burr was to become candidate for New York governor because they needed New York support. So Hamilton accused him of treason. So Burr challenges him to a duel in which Hamilton dies of a mortal wound. Burr becomes a political outcast because of this, and so he flees to the west. There are rumors of him wanting to separate the Southwest and create a new empire. So this whole incident was known as the Burr Conspiracy, which demonstrated that ambitious political leaders gain power illegitimately. The U.S. is not really a stable, united nation yet. Still yet to be established. Expansion and war. How exciting. America develops a strong merchant marines and controlling a lot of the trade in the Atlantic Ocean. The British destroy the French Navy. Napoleon responds with the Continental System, which closes Europe to British trade. But then the British respond with Orders in Council, which is a blockade of the European coast. So America's caught in between this conflict between the British and the French. But then it gets even more personal. The British impress their deserters and our sailors into their navy, which we don't like one bit. So then there was the Chesapeake Leopard incident, which was the American ship Chesapeake refused to let the British ship Leopard search them. So the British open fire and the Americans are forced to surrender. So kind of getting into a conflict now, but Jefferson doesn't really want to be in war, so he enacts the embargo, which stopped American trade with any foreign nation. But rather than hurting them, it hurts us. It caused an economic depression in the United States, so Jefferson finally ends it with peaceable coercion. Then James Madison wins the presidential election of 1808. So he enacts the Non-Intercourse Act, which opens trade with all nations except Great Britain and France. So Napoleon announces that he's not going to interfere anymore, but Britain does nothing. So there's still an embargo against Britain. Now the Indians are getting into the conflict. They look to the British for protection because they were the ones that had tried to limit westward expansion, so they saw the British as protection from us. Jefferson's policy for the Indians was to either use them late or you go west, one or the other. So he sends William Henry Harrison to govern the Indiana Territory. The Indians wanted to resist, and the British tried to renew friendship with the Indians. The Indian, known as Prophet, inspired a religious revival and helped to unite the Indians in the cause against, well, pretty much us. The Indian Tecumseh set out to unite all Indians, and he said that land belongs to all the tribes together and not the whites. So we've got to be together. We've got to get those whites out of our land. So the Indians began raiding white settlements. So Harrison drives off Indians and burns the town of Prophetstown in the Battle of Tippecanoe. The Northerners wish to annex British Canada. The Southerners want to get Spanish Florida. So because they wanted Florida, it was a motivation for a war with Britain because Spain was Britain's ally. So it was a war against both Spain and Britain. The Warhawks are the representatives in our government which are in support of a war with Britain. And whereas Jefferson avoided getting into a war, James Madison declares war against Britain. So this is the War of 1812. There were early American victories over the British on sea. However, the British soon imposed a blockade on us. There were early American successes on the Great Lakes, such as Oliver Hazard Perry's dispersion of British fleet at Put-in Bay, which made another invasion of Canada possible. The Battle of the Thames weakens the Indians in the northwest, and in the Battle of Horseshoe Bend, Andrew Jackson takes revenge on the Southwest Indians. The Creek tribe cedes land, and Jackson becomes general in the American army. But then the British get mad, and they burn our capital city, Washington. There's also the bombardment of Baltimore, which wasn't really good for us, but what came out of it was the Star-Spangled Banner, because Francis Scott Key saw our flag still standing, and he wrote our national anthem. The Battle of New Orleans, in which the Americans win a great victory because we're very well protected, and we just keep on sitting there, and we suffer very few casualties. So then the British retreat. However, during most of the war, we're just failing miserably. This is not a good war for us. So more and more people began to oppose the war. We don't want to be in this war anymore. We're losing. So the New England states are particularly opposed to the war and the Republican government. So the New England states, they meet at the Hartford Convention, They discussed secession. They thought about seceding from the Union once again. They discussed nullification and constitutional amendments to protect them from Southern and Western influence. However, their efforts became futile after a peace settlement to end the war. So, in the Treaty of Ghent, British and Americans give up what they wanted. There's a renunciation of impressment, cession of Canada, and other territorial concessions. That was the British part of the deal. The agreement was mutual disarmament on the Canada-America border, which was later to become one of the most unguarded borders in, I don't know if it's the world. So, by now, the Indians are less able to defend their land, and there's increasing expansion to the west, which will continue in the next few decades. And next time, we'll be discussing varieties of American nationalism. Hope this helps.